The night Clara Bell lost everything, the whole town watched from behind saloon windows and pretended not to see. She stood alone in the middle of Mercy Creek's dusty main street, clutching a small wooden suitcase in one hand and the key to a house that no longer belonged to her in the other. Behind her, two men were carrying the last pieces of her life out onto the porch. Her mother's photograph had been removed from the wall. Her father's old workbench had been dragged into the yard. Even the little tin box containing his letters had been thrown into the dirt. Across the street stood Silas Granger, the richest and most powerful man in the county. He wore an expensive black coat, polished boots, and the calm expression of someone who had never been told no. "You should have thought about the consequences before you crossed me," he said. Clara wiped a tear from her cheek. "I didn't cross you, Mr. Granger. I simply refused to belong to you." The entire street went silent. Silas's jaw tightened. "Then you're going to learn what refusing me costs." If you enjoy emotional Western stories filled with mystery, courage, justice, and second chances, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stay with us until the end, because the stranger who arrived that night would uncover a secret that had been buried for 8 years, and change Clara's life forever. Clara Bell had never been born into comfort. She was 26 years old and had lived in Mercy Creek since childhood. The town was surrounded by dry hills, open ranchland, and endless stretches of dusty road. There was one bank, one church, one general store, one blacksmith, and the Blue Lantern Saloon. That was where Clara worked. She served drinks, carried plates, swept floors, and sometimes sang when the piano player failed to appear. Some people looked down on her because she worked in a saloon. Clara didn't care. Her father had taught her that honest work was never shameful. "There's no shame in earning your bread," Thomas Bell used to tell her. "The shame is in taking bread from someone who earned it." Thomas had been a ranch hand for nearly 20 years. He had worked for Silas Granger. He knew horses better than he knew people, and he could read a storm from the color of the horizon. 8 years earlier, Thomas had died in what everyone called a riding accident. Clara had never believed it. Her father had been careful. He didn't make careless mistakes. But Clara had never found proof. After his death, her mother had tried to keep the family together. 3 years later, illness took her too. Clara was left alone. She had a small house, a few debts, and one promise to herself. She would survive, so she worked, every morning, every night, and somehow she kept smiling. Not because life was easy. Because she refused to let life make her cruel. Silas Granger had been watching her for nearly a year. At first, he admired her independence. Then he decided he wanted to own it. He sent flowers. Clara returned them. He offered her a position at his ranch. She declined. He offered to pay her debts. She told him she would rather work 3 jobs than owe him a favor. One evening, after the saloon emptied, Silas approached the bar. "You're wasting your life in this place." Clara continued polishing a glass. "I've heard worse opinions. I could give you a house. I already have one. A better house." "Why?" Silas leaned closer. "Because I don't like seeing a woman like you struggle." Clara finally looked at him. "You don't like seeing me struggle, or you don't like seeing me independent?" His expression hardened. "You have a sharp tongue. My father said it kept fools away." Silas stared at her. Then he smiled. "Your father was a difficult man too." He walked away. Clara watched him go. Something about those words frightened her. 3 days later, someone knocked on her door before sunrise. It was Sheriff Wade Mercer. He removed his hat. "Clara, there's been a complaint against you." "What kind?" "Debt." "I don't have a debt." The sheriff hesitated. "Silas says you borrowed money from him." "I didn't. He has a signed document." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "That isn't my signature." The sheriff looked away. "I know. Then why are you here?" "Because the paper says otherwise." Within an hour, Clara stood inside the bank. Silas sat across from her. The bank manager placed a document on the desk. According to the paper, Clara had borrowed a large amount of money from Silas 18 months earlier and used her house as collateral. Clara stared at the signature. It looked almost exactly like hers. "Almost. I never signed this." Silas folded his hands. "Perhaps you forgot." "I didn't. You've had a difficult year. You know I didn't sign this." Silas smiled. "Then prove it." Clara looked at the sheriff. Then the banker. Nobody spoke. That was when she understood. They weren't confused. They were afraid. Afraid of Silas Granger. She was given 72 hours to repay the debt. She had no money. No lawyer would help her. The judge refused to hear her complaint. The sheriff told her to settle. Even the preacher advised her to accept the situation. Clara looked at him and asked quietly, if surrender is the only way poor people survive, then what is the point of calling this a free country? He had no answer. For 3 days Clara fought. She searched every drawer and every box for proof. She found her father's old writing book and compared his handwriting with the forged document. The signature wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to fool anyone who wanted to believe it. On the 3rd morning, men arrived at her house. They began carrying her belongings outside. Her chair, her bed, her mother's dishes, her father's workbench. Clara stood on the porch. Stop. One man ignored her. Another carried out a wooden chest. Please, she said, those things belong to my parents. A familiar voice answered, then you should have paid your debt. Silas Granger stood beside the road. Clara turned. Why are you doing this? You know why. I refused you. His face hardened. You embarrassed me. I said no. You made me look foolish. No, Silas. Clara stepped down from the porch. You did that yourself. His eyes became cold. You're going to learn that people like you don't humiliate people like me and walk away. I'd rather lose everything than become something you own. Silas nodded. Then lose everything. He walked away. By sunset, Clara had nowhere to go. She carried her suitcase to the edge of town. The sky darkened. A cold wind swept across the plains. She sat beneath an old cottonwood tree. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to cry. She cried for her father, her mother, her home, her memories, the future she had imagined. She cried because she had finally discovered something worse than losing everything. She had discovered how quickly people could watch your suffering and decide it wasn't their problem. Then she heard a horse. Slow, steady, coming from the western road. Clara wiped her face. A lone rider appeared through the darkness. He wore a weathered brown hat, a dark canvas coat, dusty boots, and a worn gun belt. His horse was a tall gray gelding. The stranger stopped several yards away. He looked at Clara, then at her suitcase. Road's a poor place to sleep. I wasn't planning to sleep. Where were you planning to go? She looked toward the horizon. I don't know. The stranger studied her. You hungry? No. Her stomach growled. He raised an eyebrow. Clara sighed. Yes. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out bread and dried meat. He tossed it to her. Thank you. Name's Caleb. Clara. I know. She froze. How? Caleb looked toward Mercy Creek. Town has a loud mouth. You've been there. Just arrived. Then how do you know my name? He was silent. Finally he said, I knew your father. The food slipped from Clara's hand. What? Thomas Bell. You knew my father. I worked beside him once. Where? Granger Ranch. Clara immediately stood. You worked for Silas. Years ago. Then you need to leave. Caleb nodded. Fair enough. He turned toward his horse. Clara watched him. Something stopped her. Wait. He turned. What happened to my father? Caleb's expression changed. I don't know. You just said you knew him. I did. Then tell me something. She took a step closer. Was he really killed in an accident? Caleb looked away. No. Clara's heart stopped. What do you mean? I mean your father was afraid before he died. Afraid of what? Caleb looked directly at her. Silas Granger. Clara's face went pale. Why? I don't know. You do. Caleb sighed. I know enough to tell you that you should stop asking questions unless you're ready for the answers. Clara's voice trembled. I've lived with questions for 8 years. She looked him directly in the eyes. I want answers. You may not like them. I don't care. Caleb looked toward Mercy Creek. Then back at Clara. Then we better go back to town. And that was the moment Clara realized her story wasn't ending beneath that lonely tree. It was beginning. The next morning, Clara and Caleb returned to Mercy Creek. People noticed immediately. By noon, Silas Granger knew. He sent one of his men to warn Caleb. Leave town. Caleb looked at him. No. The man stared. You don't know who you're dealing with. Caleb quietly replied, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. That evening, Clara found Caleb sitting outside the livery stable. You're making things worse. Probably. You don't know what Silas is capable of. I do. You worked for him. I knew him. What happened between you? Caleb remained silent. Finally he said, I found out what kind of man he was. Clara sat beside him. Then why come back? Caleb looked toward the western hills. Your father once saved my life. Clara looked at him. How? We were moving cattle through a canyon. A horse panicked. I was thrown. A steer came straight at me. And my father. He pulled me out. Clara smiled sadly. That sounds like him. Caleb nodded. He told me something afterward. What? A man's worth isn't measured by what he owns. It's measured by what he protects when nobody is watching. Clara looked toward town. That's why you're here, partly. In the other part, Caleb looked at her. You were sitting alone under a tree with everything you owned in one suitcase. He paused. I couldn't ride past. For the first time in days, Clara felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. But in Mercy Creek, hope could be dangerous. Because Silas Granger had no intention of letting either of them stay. 2 days later, a fire broke out behind the Blue Lantern. Someone accused Clara of starting it. The sheriff arrived. Silas arrived shortly afterward. Clara understood immediately. He was building another case against her. Caleb stepped beside her. She didn't do it. Sheriff Mercer looked at him. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Caleb looked toward the burning building. Because the fire started behind the saloon. He walked into the alley. Clara followed. There were boot prints in the dirt. Fresh ones. Caleb followed them toward the bank. Then the trail disappeared, but something lay on the ground. A torn piece of paper. Clara picked it up. 3 words were written across it. Bell knows everything. Clara stared at the message. My father. Caleb's expression became serious. He knew something. But what? Caleb looked at the old buildings around them. We need to find out. That night, they went to Clara's old house. It was empty. The windows were boarded. Her furniture was gone. Clara walked through the rooms slowly. Her mother's kitchen, her bedroom, her father's workshop. She stopped. My father never kept his tools there. Caleb looked at the workbench. Together they moved it. Behind the bench was a loose wooden board. Caleb pulled it away. A narrow metal box was hidden underneath. Clara's hands began to shake. She opened it. Inside were letters, receipts, a ledger, and an old photograph. She lifted the photograph. Silas Granger stood in the center. Beside him were several men. The bank manager, Sheriff Mercer, and behind them stood Thomas Bell. But Thomas wasn't smiling. He was staring directly at the camera. Clara turned the photograph over. There was a date, the same year her father died. Her hands trembled. Then she opened the ledger. Page after page was filled with Thomas's handwriting. Names, dates, payments, land transfers, secret debts. Clara looked at Caleb. What is this? Caleb didn't answer. She turned another page. At the bottom, her father's handwriting became darker. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Clara stopped breathing. Caleb stared at the words. Then Clara found one final note. Silas has people everywhere. I cannot trust the sheriff. I cannot trust the bank. The only person I believe might help is Caleb Mercer. Clara slowly looked up. Caleb Mercer. The cowboy's face went pale. That's my name. And Clara realized the stranger who had appeared on the road wasn't there by accident. Her father had written his name down 8 years ago. And somehow, after all those years, Caleb had finally come back. But neither of them knew that before sunrise, Silas Granger would discover they had found the ledger. And he would do anything to make sure its secrets never reached the outside world. Move faster, Lena. This is a restaurant, not a rehabilitation center. The manager's voice cut through the busy dining room, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lena froze beside table 12, a tray balanced carefully in her hands. A glass trembled near the edge of the tray, but she steadied it before it could fall. A few customers turned their heads. Someone whispered. Someone else looked away. Lena lowered her eyes and quietly said, Yes, Mr. Carter. But before you hear what happened next, stay with this story until the end. Because sometimes the person everyone calls slow is actually carrying a weight nobody else can see. And if you believe people deserve kindness before judgment, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You never know when a story like this might remind someone to keep going. Lena was 27 years old, with soft brown eyes, dark shoulder-length hair usually tied into a simple ponytail, and a quiet smile that appeared even when she was exhausted. She had been working at the Riverside Grill for almost 8 months. She was not the fastest waitress. She knew that, but she was careful. She remembered customers' names. She knew who wanted extra napkins, who needed less ice, who preferred their coffee without sugar, and which elderly customers needed a little extra time to sit down. Her coworkers appreciated her. Most customers did too, but her manager, Daniel Carter, saw only one thing: speed. Daniel was 39, sharply dressed, ambitious, and obsessed with keeping the restaurant running perfectly. He believed hesitation meant weakness and slow movement meant incompetence. And Lena's careful pace drove him crazy. Every morning, before the doors opened, he would stand near the kitchen entrance holding a clipboard and watching the staff. Lena, table 6. She would hurry. Lena, coffee for table 3. She would hurry again. Why are you moving like that? She would force herself to move faster. But there was something Daniel didn't know. Lena had a prosthetic leg. She had lost her right leg 3 years earlier after a serious accident. She had spent months learning how to walk again. She had learned to balance, learned to climb stairs, learned how to stand for long periods, and eventually learned how to work a job where she was constantly on her feet. She never asked anyone for special treatment. She only wanted the chance to work. Her prosthetic leg was usually hidden beneath her dark uniform pants. Most people never noticed, but after several hours of standing, the socket would become uncomfortable. Sometimes the skin beneath it would become irritated. Sometimes every step sent a sharp ache through her body. Still, Lena showed up. Every day, because she needed the job. Her younger brother, Noah, was 16 and still in school. Their mother had passed away years earlier, and Lena had become the person who kept their little household together. Rent, groceries, school expenses, electricity, everything depended on her paycheck. So when Daniel embarrassed her, she swallowed her pride. When customers complained about her pace, she apologized. When coworkers told her to report him, she simply smiled and said, "He's under pressure." But Daniel became harsher. One Friday evening, the restaurant was packed. Plates moved constantly from the kitchen to the dining room. The sound of silverware, conversations, and ringing phones filled the air. Lena carried 4 plates toward table 9. She took each step carefully. Then Daniel appeared behind her. Seriously, she stopped. "Sir, you've been carrying those plates for 30 seconds. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't make customers happy." She looked down. "I'll be faster." "You always say that." A few people nearby heard him. Lena's face turned red. She continued walking, but one of the plates slipped slightly. Daniel grabbed it. "See, this is exactly what I mean. I'm sorry. You need to decide whether you can actually do this job." Those words stayed with her for the rest of the night. At closing time, Lena went into the small staff room. She sat down. For several seconds, she simply stared at the floor. Then she pulled up her pant leg. The edge of her prosthetic socket had rubbed against her skin. There was a painful red mark. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly. Then she whispered, "Just one more day." The next morning, she came back. Because that was Lena, she didn't quit when things were hard. She simply found a way to continue. Weeks passed. Then something happened that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The restaurant wasn't busy. Daniel was in his office reviewing sales reports while Lena cleaned the dining area. A customer had left a wallet on a chair. Lena noticed it. She picked it up and immediately brought it to Daniel. "There's a wallet at table 7. Daniel barely looked up, put it in the lost and found drawer. She nodded. That was when the front door opened. An elegantly dressed older man entered the restaurant. He was around 65, with silver hair, a navy coat, and a calm expression. He looked around before choosing a table near the window. Lena approached him. "Good afternoon. Welcome." The man smiled. "Thank you." She handed him a menu. "My name is Lena. Take your time." He looked at her carefully. "Do you work here often?" "Almost every day." "You seem familiar." Lena smiled. "I don't think we've met." The man ordered lunch. Lena served him. He noticed she moved more slowly than the other waiters. But he also noticed something else. She never rushed him. When his drink spilled slightly, she didn't make him feel embarrassed. When he asked a question about the menu, she answered patiently. And when he finished eating, Lena said, "I hope everything was comfortable for you." The man looked at her for a moment. It was. Then he left. Lena thought nothing of it. But Daniel did. As soon as the man walked out, Daniel came toward her. "You were too slow again." Lena sighed quietly. "The restaurant wasn't busy." "That isn't the point." "What is the point?" Daniel stared at her. "You're always making excuses." Lena finally looked directly at him. "I don't make excuses." "Then stop acting like a victim." The room went silent. Lena's expression changed. She had tolerated insults. She had tolerated criticism. But something inside her finally cracked. "I have never asked you to treat me differently," she said quietly. "I've only asked you to let me do my job." Daniel laughed. "Then do it properly." Lena nodded. "Okay." She walked away. That evening, after closing, Lena stayed behind. She always checked her prosthetic before going home. The restaurant was nearly empty. She went into the storage room, sat on a small chair, and removed her prosthetic leg. She inspected the connection. One of the adjustment components had become loose. She took a small tool from her bag. Her hands were tired. She tightened the component. Then she stopped. She heard footsteps. Lena looked up. Daniel was standing in the doorway. He had returned because he had forgotten his phone. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Daniel looked down, then at Lena, then at the prosthetic leg beside her. His face changed. What happened? Lena immediately pulled her pant leg down. Nothing. Lena, please. Daniel stood there silently. You have a prosthetic. She nodded. He looked genuinely stunned. I didn't know. You never asked. The words hit him harder than she intended. Daniel slowly stepped closer. Is that why you walk slowly? Lena looked at him. Sometimes. He didn't know what to say. She continued adjusting the prosthetic. Some days are easy. Some days aren't. But I still come to work. Daniel looked away. Why didn't you tell me? Lena gave a tired smile. Because I didn't want you to think I was asking for sympathy. Daniel remembered every time he had shouted at her. Every time he had told her to move faster. Every time he had humiliated her in front of customers. Suddenly, all his words sounded different. He looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly from exhaustion. Does it hurt? Lena paused. Sometimes. How long have you been working like this? Since I learned how to walk again. Daniel stared at her. You lost your leg? Yes. How? She was quiet for a moment. Car accident. Daniel sat down. For the first time since Lena had known him, he didn't look like a manager. He looked like a man who had just discovered he had judged someone without knowing their story. My mother used to say, Lena continued, that you never know how heavy someone's day is just by looking at them. Daniel swallowed. I was wrong. Lena looked at him. He continued. I thought you were careless. I'm not. I know. I thought you were slow. I am slow. Daniel almost smiled. Then Lena smiled too. But, she added, slow doesn't mean incapable. Daniel nodded. No, it doesn't. The next morning, something strange happened. Before opening, Daniel gathered the entire staff. Everyone expected another lecture. Instead, he stood in front of them and said, I owe Lena an apology. Lena looked up. Daniel continued, I have criticized her for being slow. I've embarrassed her in front of customers. I made assumptions about her without knowing what she was dealing with. Nobody spoke. I was wrong. Lena lowered her eyes. Daniel turned toward her. I'm sorry. It was the first time anyone had ever heard Daniel publicly admit a mistake. But he didn't stop there. He changed the restaurant's scheduling system. He added short rest periods for employees who spent long hours standing. He moved frequently used supplies closer to the service stations. He stopped measuring employees only by speed. And he started measuring them by customer satisfaction, teamwork, reliability, and care. The change was immediate, but not everyone was happy. A senior waiter named Mark complained. Why are we changing everything because one employee has special needs? Daniel looked at him. We aren't changing everything for one employee. He paused. We're changing it because we're supposed to treat people like human beings. Mark said nothing. Over the next few weeks, Lena became more confident. Daniel even asked her for suggestions. She pointed out several problems with the restaurant's layout. The trays are stored too far from the dining room. She showed him. Moving them here would save everyone time. Daniel stared. You've been thinking about this. Every day. He moved the trays. She was right. Service became faster. Then she suggested reorganizing the reservation system. Again, she was right. Soon Daniel realized something uncomfortable. The employee he had called slow had been one of the smartest people in the restaurant. She simply noticed things other people ignored. One afternoon, the older customer who had visited weeks earlier returned. He sat at the same table. Lena recognized him. Welcome back. He smiled. I was hoping you'd be here. Lena laughed. I'm glad. The man looked around. The restaurant feels different. Lena smiled. People are smiling more. He nodded. Then Daniel approached. The man's expression became serious. Mr. Carter. Daniel froze. You know my name. I know more than you think. The man introduced himself as Thomas Reed. He was the owner of the building where the restaurant operated. But that wasn't all. He was also part of the restaurant's investment group. Daniel's stomach tightened. Thomas looked at Lena. She is one of the reasons this place still has potential. Daniel nodded. I know that now. Thomas studied him. Do you? Yes. Thomas smiled. Good. Then he turned toward Lena. I'd like to offer you a position. Lena looked confused. What position? Assistant Operations Coordinator. Her eyes widened. I don't have management experience. Thomas smiled. You have something more valuable. What? You notice people. Lena didn't know what to say. Daniel looked at her and said, you should take it. She looked at him. Are you sure? I am. For the first time, Lena saw something different in Daniel's eyes. Respect. Months later, the restaurant was thriving. Lena's new role allowed her to help train employees and improve the restaurant's accessibility. Daniel became a different manager. Not perfect, but better. Whenever a new employee struggled, he remembered Lena. Whenever someone moved slowly, he didn't immediately assume laziness. And whenever someone made a mistake, he asked one simple question before judging them. Are you okay? One evening, Lena was preparing to leave. Daniel approached her. Lena, yes, I wanted to thank you. She smiled. For what? For teaching me something I should have learned years ago. What? That leadership isn't about making people afraid of you. He paused. It's about making people believe they can become better. Lena smiled. And I learned something from you too. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What? That people can change. He laughed. I'll take that. Lena walked toward the door. Her steps weren't perfect. They never would be. But they were steady. And that was enough. Outside, Noah was waiting for her. How was work? Lena smiled. Good. Good. She nodded. Very good. Noah grinned. Did you get promoted again? Not today. They laughed together. As they walked home, Lena looked up at the evening sky. For years, she had believed her biggest battle was learning how to walk again. But she eventually realized it wasn't. The bigger battle was learning not to let other people's judgment decide her worth. She had been called slow. She had been embarrassed. She had been underestimated. But none of those words had defined her. Her courage did. Her patience did. Her determination did. And the way she kept showing up, even on the days when every step hurt, did. Sometimes, we look at someone and see only what they cannot do. We see the hesitation, the mistake, the weakness, the difference, but we don't see the nights they spent fighting to become strong enough to stand. We don't see the pain they hide beneath ordinary clothes. We don't see how many times they almost gave up but chose to try one more time. So before you judge someone for being slow, different, quiet, or imperfect, remember Lena. Because sometimes the person moving slowly isn't falling behind. Sometimes they're simply carrying a burden you cannot see. And sometimes the person you underestimate today will be the very person who teaches you how to become better tomorrow. If Lena's story touched your heart, don't just keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need the reminder that their struggles do not make them less valuable. Because everyone is fighting a battle. And kindness costs nothing, but to someone who is struggling, it can mean everything.